dark lake. It was the year 1684, a time when the world still had many secrets beneath its surface, covered by fog, mystery, and fear. In a small, secluded village in the middle of a dense forest, the locals whispered of a dark lake. It was a place that few dared to approach, its waters as black as the night sky, its depths seemingly endless. Some said the lake was under a curse, others of souls trapped beneath its surface, and some even said that it was the very origin of the village's malady. Historian William Hale from London had heard them. Intrigued by the tales, he traveled to the village, driven by a desire to uncover the truth behind these rumors. He had spent years documenting the folklore of forgotten places, and this lake, Dark Lake as it was known, seemed to hold the promise of a story unlike any he had encountered before. The journey took him through treacherous forests, across wild rivers, and up steep hills. But eventually, he arrived at the village. The village was a quiet place, tucked away from the hustle of the world, where the only sounds were the chirping of birds and the rustling of leaves. The air was thick with the scent of pine and damp earth. The villagers were wary of outsiders, especially strangers who inquired about the lake. But William was persistent, and after some time, he managed to speak to an old man named Elias, who had lived in the village for as long as anyone could remember. "You want to know about the lake, do you?" Elias asked, his voice hoarse from years of living in isolation. "You're a brave one, but be warned. There are things about that lake no man should know." William nodded, eager to know more. "What do you mean? Is it true that it's cursed?" Elias sat back in his chair, resting his gnarled hands on the worn wooden cane he carried. He looked at William with an expression that could only be described as a mix of pity and warning. That lake existed a very long time before any of us appeared in that village, older even than the woods themselves where tall trees stand and the air smells of smoke. Some believe people have been attracted by this lake always, yet it has never been fair with any visitor of its mystery. Some tell stories, terrible ones. These were said to be former grounds for the worship where inhabitants of the land used to make offers to some gods, or perhaps to something evil. The latter one took place hundreds of years ago. At present, the lake is peopled with the lost souls who ended up drowned in water there. William listened intently, his heart racing. What happened to them? The souls? Elias sighed deeply. No one really knows. Some say they were sacrifices. Others say they were taken by the lake itself. The waters have a pull, you see, a force that drags you in, even when you don't want to go. Many who ventured near it, searching for something, have never returned. The words of the old man chilled William to the bone. Despite all these warnings, he could not resist the pull of mystery. He was a man of reason, a scholar who believed in the power of knowledge to uncover the truth. He had to see the lake for himself. The next morning, William set out alone, guided only by the directions Elias had given him. The path was rough, winding through dense forest, but eventually he came to a clearing. There, before him, lay Dark Lake. The lake was even more imposing than he had imagined. Its surface was still, reflecting the overcast sky like a mirror. But there was something unnerving about it, something that made the air feel heavier, more oppressive. The silence was absolute, the kind of silence that fills the space with an uncomfortable weight. No birds sang, no animals rustled in the underbrush. Even the wind appeared to be holding its breath, as if the whole world were waiting for something to take place. William made his way warily along the edge of the lake, the earth yielding under the soles of his boots. He knelt there and touched his fingers in the water, feeling the chill that was unlike anything he had ever known. It was a chill that seemed to get inside his bones, and for an instant, he felt the water pulling at him, urging him to step out into the dark depths. Suddenly, he heard a noise behind him, soft footsteps crunching on the ground. William turned to see a figure emerging from the woods. It was a woman, dressed in tattered clothes, her face pale and drawn, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and urgency. She stumbled toward him, her voice barely a whisper. "Don't stay too long," she said, her breath coming in short gasps. "The lake doesn't forgive." Before he could even ask her anything, she turned and ran back into the woods, disappearing as fast as she had appeared. William was standing there, not sure of what to make of this whole encounter. He had an increasing sense of unease, but his curiosity kept him fixed in place. There was something in the air, a sense that the lake was alive, watching him, waiting for something. As the day went on, William realized that the sky was darkening, the clouds thickening above. A cold wind started blowing, carrying with it a strange, almost unnatural sound, a low humming noise that seemed to come from the very depths of the lake. It was as if the water itself was calling to him, beckoning him closer. But just as he was about to step forward, a movement in the water caught his eye. A figure, pale and translucent, surfaced briefly before sinking back into the depths. William froze, his heart pounding in his chest. Was it a reflection, or something far more sinister? His pulse was racing as he struggled to make sense of what he had just seen. There was something the lake wanted him to know, some old dark secret, and it was calling to him. He had only just started his investigation, but he was already feeling the temptation of the secrets of the lake. He felt that he must discover the truth within this short period of time, else he might become another lost soul in the waters of Dark Lake. William lay awake on a small, creaky bed of the village inn, visions swamping his mind as they related to the lake. He had come back from his visit a few hours ago, but the shivering didn't leave him even now. Every time his eyelids closed, his eyes could see the dim figure floating in the water in front of him. A strange humming noise was also echoing his ears in silence in his bedroom. He could still feel the chill in his bones, the pull of the lake calling to him. He had tried to speak to the villagers about what he had seen, but they all dismissed his questions with uneasy glances and hurried words. They were afraid of the lake, afraid of what lay beneath its surface, but they would not speak of it openly. Even Elias, the old man who had shared the first cryptic warning with him, had been hesitant when he asked about the figure in the water. There was fear in his eyes, fear that went deeper than just superstition. The woman who had appeared at the lake, too, was a mystery. Her sudden arrival and disappearance felt out of place, and yet William could not shake the feeling that she knew something he had to understand. The warning she had given him echoed in his head. The lake doesn't forgive. But forgive? What had he done to provoke it? Not able to sleep, William resolved to return to the lake the next morning. He had to see it again. He had to know what was happening. He was a historian after all, and it was his duty to find out the truth, no matter how unsavory that truth might be. As he walked out from the inn, the mist from the morning hung heavy, blanketing the landscape. Everything seemed distant and unreal. The village appeared deserted than it had been previously. The streets were suspiciously quiet. He felt the stares of the villagers as he crossed through, but they said nothing at all. Only from within their doorways with closed mouths, it seemed they knew something he did not, a secret they hid from him. The forest path to the lake was even more ominous in daylight. The trees towered above, their twisted branches casting long shadows on the ground. It kept getting colder as he walked, as if the temperature was dropping with each step. The hairs on the back of his neck stood up, and he felt a tremendous urge to be watched. He had never been superstitious, never believed in the paranormal. But something about this place, this lake, made him question everything he had ever known. Finally, when he arrived at the clearing, the lake was waiting, its dark waters still and silent. The surface gleamed under the gray sky, reflecting the world around it like a mirror. William stood at the edge, staring into the depths. He could nearly hear the water calling to him, a low, beckoning hum that seemed to originate within the lake itself. He took a breath, and walked toward the water, unable to resist. Then, he saw something moving in the water. A ripple that was too perfect, too deliberate to be a passing fish or a gust of wind. The surface trembled, then stilled again as if the lake itself exhaled. William's heart was pounding as he took a step back, but his curiosity overcame his fear. He could not tear himself away. Not yet. Not until he understood. "Do you hear it?" A voice rasped from behind him, cutting across his thoughts. William spun around, his heart thudding against his chest. The woman, the one he had seen the day before, stood there, her pale face pulled taut with fear. Her eyes were wide, as if she were watching something he could not see, and her hands shook at her sides. "Do you hear it?" she whispered, her voice almost too quiet to be heard. "The hum? It calls to you, doesn't it? It calls to all of us." William's throat constricted. He wanted to question her, to demand explanations, but the words were trapped in his throat. Something was wrong about her. Something was amiss. She was like a ghost who hung between life and death, and the lake pulled her to it. He saw it all in her eyes. "You shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "None of us should be here. It's too late for us, but you can still get out. You can still save yourself." He never had a chance to tell her what to do. She walked back into the woods the same way she came, gone from there almost as quickly. And in the silence was that word: save yourself. Leave. William stood there, frozen in thought. What did she say? What did she know he didn't? Against his better judgment, he turned back to the lake. His eyes were drawn back to the water, and this time he could see something beneath the surface. It was not a person, but an outline, a shape, moving in the depths. Something large, something alive. The water shimmered and distorted as if it was alive, breathing. A chill ran down his spine as he realized that he had not been imagining the pull he had felt earlier. The lake was not just a body of water. It was a living, breathing entity, and it wanted him. It was calling to him, and if he didn't act soon, it would claim him just as it had claimed so many others. He stepped back from the water, his heart pounding. He felt the weight of the lake's presence bearing down on him, suffocating him. And then, just when he was about to turn and run, something breached the surface of the water. A pale hand, long and bony, reached up from the depths, its fingers twisting and curling as if to grasp him. William's breath caught in his throat, and he reeled backward, his heart pumping in his chest. It disappeared beneath the surface almost as quickly as it came up, but the image would not leave William's head. It wasn't a ghost, or even a ghostly thing, but something far worse, something from a time older than mortal men, with an eternity of hunger. He turned and ran, his feet pounding the earth beneath him, but he couldn't shake the feeling that the lake was watching, waiting. As he ran back to the village, he could hear the hum again, faint but persistent, echoing in his ears. It wasn't just in his mind. He could feel it in the air, vibrating through the ground beneath his feet. The lake was alive, and it was calling to him. When he reached the village, the same strange silence hung in the air. The villagers were still watching him, their eyes filled with unspoken knowledge. They knew what he had seen. They knew what was coming. William could not shake the feeling that the lake was waiting for him, that it wanted him back. And in the shadows of his mind, he knew that he would return. There was no escape for it. The lake claimed him, and soon enough, the lake would pull him under to its depths. The village was so still, unsettlingly quiet. William could feel the burden of silence settling over him as he made his way down the cobbled street, every step echoing in an emptiness. The villagers had drawn back even further since he returned. They no longer offered him the faint nods they did before he left. Rather, they stepped aside to enter their houses, pulled their doors shut behind them, as if to shroud out the world and him. The dread he had felt by the lake lingered like a shadow. hovering just behind him. It was more than just fear. It was the unmistakable sensation of being followed, watched by something that wasn't entirely human. He had seen the hand in the water. He had heard the hum. He knew it was real, but no one in the village seemed willing to acknowledge it. They all whispered in their voices, but would not speak freely to him. Even Elias, the old man that he had grown to confide in, now shunned him. William had turned into the inn late that night, hoping to unravel the mystery in the still quietness of his room when he could not sleep. Every so often he closed his eyelids, and the image came forth of the pale, bony hand protruding through the dark waters of the lake, pulling him even further into a terror of which he could not articulate the cause. The lake, it appeared, was a place of secrets. Secrets that no one in the village was prepared to share, and with which those who had reached too close had learned too late. William was bent to understand it, though the village itself seemed to warn him against this. The villagers believed that the lake was alive, that it had a mind of its own. They spoke of whispers in the wind, of the pull of the water on those who came too close. There were old tales, some whispered only by the oldest among them, of people who had vanished without a trace, their bodies never found. "Stay away from the lake," one of the villagers had muttered to him as he passed, her eyes darting nervously around, as if the very mention of the water would summon some unspeakable terror. But William was no shrinking violet when it came to a mystery, and the more the villagers tried to quiet him, the more obstinate he became. There was something about the lake that had drawn him in. He had seen something there, something that defied all logic and reason. That afternoon, after a sleepless night, he finds himself walking the same path all over again, this time towards the lake. He just couldn't help it. The pull was too strong. The need for answers clawed at him like hunger that would never be satisfied. It was not just the haunting vision of the figure in the water that had haunted him. There was a feeling that something had shifted within him. Something had changed since the hand emerged from the dark depths. This time, the forest felt colder. The wind was whispering through the trees, sending shivers down his spine. The air was thick with tension, as if the forest itself were holding its breath. The trees leaned closer, their branches heavy with the weight of old secrets, casting twisted shadows on the path ahead. Just as he was approaching the clearing, the lake came into view, dark and still. Its surface reflected the sky above in eerie clarity, like a mirror, revealing not only the world, but something else. Something hidden beneath. The humming sound was louder now, vibrating through the air, making his skin crawl. It was low, pulsating, a distant thrum of a drum, coming from deep within the water. William hesitated, his heart pounding in his chest. The voice of reason told him to turn back, but the lure of the lake, the need to know the truth, was too strong to resist. He stepped closer, his feet moving almost of their own accord. The closer he got, the more the air seemed to press in around him, suffocating him. The humming grew louder, almost unbearable now. His head throbbed as if the sound was vibrating through his very bones. And then, as he reached the edge of the water, something strange happened. The water began to ripple. It was almost imperceptible at first, a slight disturbance on the surface of the lake. Then it grew, a slow, deliberate ripple spreading out from the center, as if something below the surface was stirring, waking from a long, unnatural slumber. William's breath caught in his throat, and his heart skipped a beat. He felt a rush of panic, but he could not tear his eyes away from the water. A shape moved under the surface. It was just a shadow at first, a vague shape moving in the depths, but then, as though the water parted, this figure emerged. Pale and glowing white, its shape almost translucent. It was a woman not in the conventional sense. Her body was twisted, bent, as if it were stretched and warped by some unobserved force. Her hair was flowing around her like dark tendrils, drifting in the water as if they had a life of their own. And her eyes were not eyes at all, but empty voids, hollow and black, sucking in everything around them. William stepped back, his mind reeling, but the figure in the water did not move. She just floated there, her pale face turned upward toward him. The humming was deafening now, a sound that seemed to come from within the very earth itself. It was as though the entire world was vibrating in unison with the lake. The lips of the figure parted, and William heard the words before he could even process them. "Come closer." The voice was not human, soft and otherworldly, a whisper as if coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. Wrapping around him, pulling him toward the water and the figure seeming to call to him. He wanted to turn and run away, to flee, but his legs did not move. It was as if some unseen power was holding him there, rooted in the spot. "Come closer," the figure repeated, her voice growing louder, more insistent. William felt his heart beating with his attempts at getting away, but he could not free himself. His feet carried him along, of their own accord, further toward the water, toward the figure waiting there. He was breathing very hard, his chest beating like a drum. Beat after beat, louder and louder until it was deafening. Just as his foot touched the surface of the water, a sudden rush of air swept through the clearing, knocking him off balance. The figure in the water let out a low, guttural sound, almost a growl, and the water around her began to churn violently. The humming intensified to a deafening roar. Without a word, William retreated backwards, his legs at last responding to his frantic horror. He turned to flee, his breath uncoiling in ragged huffs as he sped across the forest floor, away from the lake, away from whatever called him. But the water sounded, hummed, as though all the trees themselves, far and near, became possessed of the noise that stayed with him. When he finally reached the village, he was gasping for breath, drenched in cold sweat. The villagers were there, watching him with those same fearful eyes, but now he saw something else in their expressions. Pity. They had known. They had always known. He had seen the lake's true face, and now there was no turning back. It was as though the air around him felt thick with an unseen weight, pressing in on all sides. The dread which had begun at the lake only grew stronger, following him back into the village, seeping into his every thought, into every moment. He had seen the figure. He felt the pull of the lake. But the worst part, the thing that gnawed at him, was the certainty that the lake was calling him back. He had tried to sleep, tried to rest, but his mind was too full of questions. Why him? Why had the figure chosen him? Why had it called to him? It was as if he was marked, as though he had been singled out for something far greater, something that lay just beyond his comprehension. The villagers had continued to avoid him, offering nothing but furtive glances and whispered words behind closed doors. Yet, despite their silence, he could see the fear in their eyes, the same fear he had seen before, but now it was sharper, more pronounced. They knew something. They were hiding something, but no one would tell him. Nobody would be mentioning the lake or the thing under the water that had been haunting this village for generations. Elias had been silent. The old man had not answered the door when William went to his small cottage in the woods, seeking answers. The windows were dark, and the garden that once was so well tended had grown wild and untamed. It was wrong. Elias had been a man of routine and knowledge. His disappearance, his refusal to speak, deepened William's suspicion. Determined to uncover the truth, he spent the next days watching people, piecing together a story from pieces of all the different conversations he's overheard, fragments on fragments. But he rarely heard anyone bring up a lake, and what he'd heard suggested the lake was some point of dark ritual, hidden horrors forgotten. There were whispers of sacrifices, people who vanished into thin air, bodies never found. Some even spoke of an old pact, a long-forgotten deal that had been struck with something that lived under the water. It was during one of his visits to the town square that William overheard a conversation that changed everything. "Did you hear?" said one of the villagers in hushed tones. "Elias has been gone for days and nobody knows where he could have gone." "I think he went to the lake," another replied, this one's voice shaking in trepidation. "They say that Elias went there to tell the spirit of the water so it would rest, but never did come back." A chill ran up William's spine. The lake had consumed Elias, but so had it all the countless others before Elias. Then again, however, lay something different, something distinctive, about this disappearance that had befallen the young man, something by which it seemed he knew this was time for him. That way, the lake was indeed waiting for him. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that they were not afraid of the lake. They were frightened of it. The lake was not just a body of water. It was a presence, a force, and it had shaped their lives for as long as anyone could remember. That night, unable to sleep, William decided to go back to the lake. The need for answers, for closure, was eating him away. The village, the people, the whispers, it all led him back to the water. He could feel the tug, a force that seemed to beckon him in his dreams and in his waking hours. It was as if the lake had chosen him, as if it wanted him to understand something he still couldn't grasp. As he walked through the forest toward the lake, the silence was oppressive. The trees seemed to close in around him, their gnarled branches twisting like dark fingers, reaching out to grab him. The wind had picked up, and it moaned through the branches, a mournful, eerie sound that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. It was the same wind he had heard before, the wind that carried with it the hum, the whisper of something ancient, something terrible. Finally, the clearing opened before him. There was a lake with an unmovable surface. Almost it seemed not natural. Something had turned life off, the very breath of the world, and the shadowing, ink-black color reflected itself from its surface so identically as the reflection in it of that same azure expanse which lay before, and over it hung that weird glow. William stepped closer to the edge of the water, his heart pounding within his chest. The hum was back, low and vibrating, echoing through the earth beneath his feet. He could feel it in his bones, in his soul, this invisible pull drawing him closer, deeper. The air cooled, and William's breath misted over his lips as he exhaled. He could see a faint outline of something down there, something moving under the water, just out of his view. He took a step back, his heart beating a little faster. That was when he saw it. A hand, pale and skeletal, slowly pushing its way up from the water. He was a man twisted in terror inside, unable to turn his head. Hand led into an arm, the shoulder appeared, and with that, the rest of the figure began rising up from the depths. A woman, or rather, a thing that was once a woman, because her body seemed pale, and her features somehow distorted as if she herself had been reshaped by the things living inside the lake. Her eyes, black, empty voids, focused on him as she stepped out of the water entirely. She was standing there, her feet in the water, but her body was substantial, her existence unmistakable. The humming was louder now, almost deafening, and William felt it in his chest, in his soul. It was the voice of the lake, the spirit that lived within it, and it was calling him. "Come to me," the figure whispered, her voice a soft, beckoning call. "Come closer." The words were like a command, and before he knew it, William found himself stepping toward the water. His body moved of its own accord, his feet sinking into the cold mud as he walked deeper into the lake's embrace. The water was freezing, but he didn't feel it. His mind was consumed by the figure, by the voice, by the pull that was stronger than his own will. Every step he took brought the figure closer, her pale, twisted form coming into sharper focus. Her hands reached out toward him, fingers long and delicate. but her touch would be anything but gentle. He could see the hunger in her eyes, the hunger of something that had not tasted the warmth of life in centuries. "Come to me," she repeated, her voice almost a purr now, soothing yet terrifying. "Come into the depths." William's chest tightened, and his breath caught in his throat. He knew he should turn back. He knew that every instinct in his body screamed for him to run, to escape, but the pull was too strong. He was drowning in it, sinking into it, unable to break free. And then, as if she knew he was hesitant, she moved. She took one step forward, and the water around her rippled, sending waves toward him. The waves crashed against his legs, pulling at him, urging him to go further into the lake. "Join me," she whispered. The coldness of the water was unbearable now, the chill seeping into his bones, freezing him from the inside out. He could no longer feel his legs, his arms, his body. All he could feel was the pull, the beckoning voice of the figure that stood before him, waiting. A cry pierced through the hum, a sound in the distance. It was a voice, and it was familiar. It was the cry of someone in pain. William turned his head, his heart racing. The sound seemed to come from somewhere deep within the lake, from the darkness that stretched beyond his reach. And in that moment, he knew. Elias. The old man had come to the lake, and now he too was lost to it. The world around William felt suspended in time, like a moment caught between breaths. The coldness of the water seemed to have sunk deep into his bones, his limbs not responding as they should have. The figure in front of him was pale and distorted, utterly unnatural, standing on the edge of the water in a presence more terrifying than any he had ever imagined. She was waiting, her eyes black and hollow, stuck on him, and to move forward was inescapable. The lake had him now. William's mind was fogged, his thoughts scattered as his body continued moving toward the water, against every instinct in him. The feeling of dread clung to him like a second skin, but the deeper he stepped into the lake, the further he was pulled, the less control he had. The whispering voice of the figure grew louder, becoming a steady chant in his ears, a soft lullaby that threatened to draw him into madness. "Come closer," the figure whispered, her voice soft and ethereal, like the breeze that drifted through the trees on a cold autumn night. "Join us, William. You were always meant to be here." There was no escape from it, no way to fight it. The water had taken him, just as it had taken all the others before him. The shadows at the edge of his vision seemed to grow, stretch toward him with some unseen power. His feet now plunged into the water, submerged to the ankles and the knees. With every step, dark and unsettling presence in the lake seemed to deepen its reach, pulling him deeper. Suddenly he halted. Something inside him, the last shreds of consciousness, screamed that this was the point of no return. His heart was pounding, and he turned his head, but the forest behind him was gone. The trees, the path leading to the village, the safe ground he knew so well, they were all gone. All there was the lake, stretching out before him in endless, black stillness. For a moment, she was lost beneath the waves, her body sinking out of view like a phantom disappearing. But the awareness of being watched grew thicker, a presence surrounding him, drawing closer to something unknown. He tried to break free, tried to step back, but the weight of the water and the pull of the lake refused to let him do so. She emerged slowly from the water, her face rising up like the moon through a clouded sky. "I am not merely a figure," she said, her voice now ringing in William's mind. "I am the lake. I am its keeper of depths." William felt his heart beat faster, his breathing shallow. The words were a revelation, a horrifying truth settling over him. It wasn't just a spirit, a lost soul reaching out. This was something much older, much darker. The lake was alive, a sentient force, and it had taken the souls of those who got too close. "You were chosen, William," the figure said on, her face twisted up into something both beautiful and terrible. "You were meant to be part of this, just like Elias, just like all the others. We have waited for you." His stomach churned, and the ground beneath him seemed to tremble. He could hear the whispers of the other lost souls, their voices rising from the depths, reaching out, calling his name. Elias's voice was among them, faint and broken, a reminder of the village's terrible secret. They were all here, trapped in the lake, bound to its dark waters, never to escape. A ripple in the water caused him to look down. From beneath the surface, hundreds of pale, bony hands began to emerge, slowly rising like 1,000 ghostly fingers clawing at the surface of the lake. William's breath caught in his throat as the hands reached for him, the water rippling violently around them. They moved with purpose, their intent unmistakable. "They are waiting," the figure said, her voice now tinged with a cold finality. "You belong to the lake now, just like Elias. The price has been paid." The hands swarmed him, their cold, clammy fingers gripping his legs, pulling him deeper into the lake. His heart pounded in his chest, but the pull of the water was overwhelming. Panic shot through him, and he tried to scream, but the words were swallowed by the water, disappearing into the deep. His body struggled against the unseen force, but it was futile. He was being pulled down deeper into the lake, towards the black depths where the souls of the lost were trapped for eternity. And then, as though the lake itself had jaws and swallowed him whole down to the very bottom of the lake, the waters closed over his head and engulfed him in all black darkness. He could no longer speak, no longer tell from the end of the world of the lake and where his head started. The world above, lost. The crushing silence of deep water, whispers of drowned, hum of the eternal song of the lake. He felt himself sinking, dragged by invisible hands into the depths of the water, where no light could reach and no escape was possible. As he sank deeper, he remembered the figure's face, hollow eyes, twisted form, beckoning him toward her, toward joining himself with the lake. And the price was steep indeed, but inevitable. For he had heard the whispers before and seen the shadows in the water. It had come for him all along. A cold realization swept over him like a shroud. This was not the end, but only the beginning. The lake did not take souls. It swallowed them, held onto them, warped them into something else. He was not dying. He was becoming one with the lake, a part of its eternal hunger. A scream rose from within him, a scream that would never escape. When the villagers went to the lake the following morning, they saw nothing but the still, dark waters. William's body was nowhere to be seen. He had disappeared, vanished without a trace. Some said he had drowned. Others whispered that the lake had taken him. But nobody knew for sure. Nobody dared say anything about it out in the open. They only felt the change, the growing silence in the village, the deeper shadow that had settled over the land. And the lake? It was as it had always been, dark, still, and watching, waiting for the next soul to wander too close to its depths. It would claim them, as it had always claimed, and its whispers would continue to echo across the waters, calling to the lost and the damned. And in the deepest, darkest part of the lake, the spirits of the lost souls swirled, their cries fading into the eternal hum of the water's heartbeat.